It's a big day in the road world as SRAM have finally released their electronic Rival AXS group set. SRAM claim it promises the same ride experience, same eTap shift logic and all of the advantages a wireless system can bring, but crucially at a more affordable price. Sounds too good to be true? Well, I've been lucky enough to get a first ride in on this Rival equipped Boardman 9.4 SLR, so I can give you my initial impressions. Before we get into the details, I want to thank our sponsors Freewheel for decking us out in this lovely ride kit. You can find out more with links in the video description. And don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that little bell icon so you get notified every time we upload a new video. Here are the key spec highlights that I'm sure you're keen to know more about. As I've already mentioned, it's the most affordable road wireless group set ever from SRAM. Like Force and Red, Rival is also 12-speed and it works with the same eTap shift logic as other AXS group sets. This means you use one shifter to go up the cassette and the other one to go back. Press them both together and you move the front derailleur in either direction. Regarding the price, and remember these are the full RRP figures, Rival AXS will cost £1,314 for the 2x version and £1,104 for the 1x. For those who like to track your data, there's also a power meter upgrade option at just £230. Just like their flagship Red AXS group set, SRAM have changed the way we think about gearing. By concentrating on a wider range cassette at the back, in the case of Rival that's either a 1030 or a 1036 tooth cassette, they've been able to reduce the chainring sizes at the front. So Rival's largest chainring setup is a 3750, which with the aforementioned cassette gives a similar range to a more traditional 3953. Why is this important? Well, SRAM is claiming to offer a wider spread of gears at the top end, for example when climbing the steepest hills or going flat out with a tailwind. But crucially, where we spend most of our time on the cassette, the gaps are kept close, using one tooth jumps. The theory being you get the maximum range and the best refinement in one group set package. 1x and 2x options are available, including a wide option, like Force and Red. In terms of weight, the group set is only 300 grams heavier than Force AXS, which I think is pretty good, considering the price. So if you like to mix and match components, you'll be pleased to know Rival AXS has full AXS compatibility. That means it will work with Force, Red, and even the mountain bike Eagle group sets. So if you had a Red AXS group set but wanted a cheaper training cassette to prevent wrecking your fancy Red model, you could buy a Rival cassette as a more affordable option. So one of the questions you're always going to get around electronic group sets are, how long is the battery going to last? Now, I haven't had this bike long enough to actually run the battery out, but I have been using Force and Red for 3 or 4 years now, and on average I'm getting about 3 to 4 months between charges. And it's worth remembering with eTap, the battery charges off a USB port and it charges from flat to full in 40 minutes. Finally, as you'd expect, it gets full AXS app support for custom shifting controls. When I got wind of Rival AXS, I have to admit I've been somewhat wary of just what they'd have to do to an AXS system to bring it down to the sort of money plenty of people pay for a mechanical group set equipped bike. Thankfully, SRAM have been pretty thoughtful on what to leave out and what to keep, while trying to keep things more affordable. The great thing is that none of the underlying mechanics of the AXS system have been played with. This means it has the same electronic brain, the same shift logic, and most importantly, the same motors, moving gears and antennas which transmit information between itself and the AXS app. So in theory, when you're out on the road, Rival AXS should shift just as well as SRAM's more premium Force and Red AXS group sets. And from my first ride impressions, that looks to be exactly the case. As I've already mentioned, you get the same simple functionality. Click the right hand button for a harder gear, click the left hand to make it easier. Click both together and it shifts the front chainring. If you are coming to AXS fresh from a mechanical group set or Shimano's Di2 where the button configuration is set up to emulate a mechanical shift trigger, then you'd expect some period of adjustment to get used to SRAM's layout. But in my experience, it takes very little time at all and becomes intuitive just within a few clicks. The shifting across the rear block is just as accurate and just as swift as Force AXS. It's also on a par with Ultegra Di2 and significantly cheaper than both. Now you may have heard talk of SRAM's AXS front mechs taking longer to shift compared to mechanical front mechs. Without some scientific equipment, that's really hard to accurately quantify beyond the feeling that you get. From my own experience, I think it's more of a difference in action from the double click on AXS that makes it feel like it's moving slower. With a mechanical front mech, you feel the derailleur move straight away thanks to the feedback that you get through the lever as you're pushing the mech. With AXS, this feedback is removed as you're just tapping 2 buttons. Again, without fancy equipment, it's hard to accurately quantify, but for me, the shift time is pretty much the same, and the difference is mainly in feel. Obviously, money has to be saved somewhere, and the main cost saving comes from the materials used. There's lots of carbon fibre in Red of Force. Instead, Rival uses aluminium, steel or nylon. And as I've mentioned, this adds up to 300 grams in overall weight. But the material differences between the mechs have no effect on the performance. The rear cassette uses a full pinned construction, which you'll be pleased to know helps keep the price of replacement down to an RRP of £112. This isn't exactly cheap, but it's much more affordable than Force at £170 or Red at an RRP of £325. And despite the reduction in cost, the shift quality of Rival across the cassette is superb. It's quiet, and I for one like the new high polished chrome finish over the rather dull all black of the first generation Force Axis. Although it's worth mentioning, SRAM have switched Force cassettes to the same high polished finish for 2021. The other difference aside from materials is in the shifters themselves. The Rival units forego the two ports that both Force and Red carry, which means you can add additional satellite shifters. The hoods also remove the contact point adjustment for the brakes, though they do retain the reach adjustment for the levers. If you're completely wedded to the idea of secondary satellite shifters, then this may be a bit of a kick in the guts. That said, if you're used to mechanical groups, then you've probably never missed them. The reduction in features does have one benefit, however. The removal of the extra ports and the adjusters means that the hood shape and breadth is reduced down from my own measurements of 71.4mm tall and 36.3mm wide for Force to 67.5mm tall and 34.3mm for Rival. The hood covering has been reshaped and restyled too, with a linear grip pattern that closely matches the gear shift trigger rather than the cross-hatch textured grip of Force. No self-respecting electronic group set would be complete without its own app, and Rival is no different. Pair the group set to your phone by the free Axis app and you can adjust settings, such as the number of multi-shifts you get from a prolonged button press, or choose compensation mode, which automatically shifts the rear gears to compensate when you shift the front mech. This helps put you in the next best available gear and to keep your pedalling and cadence smooth. Finally, you can also go full auto shift for the front mech. This means as you shift up and down the rear block, the bike will automatically change the front mech to the next best gear when you're reaching the extremes at either end of the 12 speeds. Apps rarely get a mention when talking group set, but the AXS one really does deserve praise. And not just for the way it adds adjustability to the system, which admittedly is something you can do with Shimano's Di2 systems once you've invested in the additional Bluetooth aerial. And remember, it costs $79.99 and it has to be fitted. What the AXS app also offers is more analysis opportunities for your riding. The app will record a ride with all the usual metrics like speed, distance, moving time, heart rate and full GPS tracking. But it also adds in component data. You can track how many times you'll shift a gear in a ride, be it the front or the rear gears. It can also track things like the time or distance spent in each gear. If you're using a power meter, it'll add those power metrics, and if you run a Quark tyre whiz, you'll even get tyre pressures. Interestingly, throughout testing, I've been running Garmin Connect, Strava and SRAM AXS all through my iOS phone. And the first app to upload and notify me is consistently SRAM's. This is impressive stuff from predominantly a hardware manufacturer, and SRAM should be applauded for not overlooking what could be an increasingly vital addition, especially as bike tech becomes more connected and arguably asked for by more consumers. In conclusion, Rival AXS has taken the best elements of Force and Red AXS and brought the same user experience to a relatively more affordable end of the market. Living with AXS is easy. The batteries may not last as long on paper as the i2, but they're far more convenient. A quick click and the batteries are released and plugged into a charger. They're topped up from empty in 40 minutes, and in a world that's used to charging devices daily, I feel that's no hardship whatsoever. The reliable and accurate shifting outshines mechanical shifting, and being wireless, it means there's a couple of less cables to worry about. It's a real bonus for those who loathe dealing with internal cable routing and maintenance. Does Rival spell the end of the mechanical group set? No, not at all. Well, not just yet. What Rival does signify is bringing cutting-edge tech down to a lower level makes sense when it's done this well. And that's something both Shimano and Campagnolo should take note of. Especially if Rival has the success that its widespread take-up from bike brands suggests will happen. But it's worth recalling that Force AXS on its launch retailed at £2,274, but the price revision SRAM brought out at the end of last year dropped Force down to a much more affordable £1,540. If they did a similar thing with Rival a couple of years down the line, then maybe we will see the end of the humble gear cable, just as the hydraulic hose may just spell the end for the brake cable. But what do you all think? Is Rival an affordable electronic option, or is the price still too hard to stomach? Would it be something you'd consider? or will you be sticking with either Shimano or Campagnolo? As always, let us know in the comments, and finally, don't forget to like and subscribe.